when I think about masculinity, I think about the reflections and not only what media, television, movies has kind of been pumping to us, at least in my lifetime. I'm a child of the 80s. I was born in 1980. So I was hit over the head with wrestling and Arnold Schwarzenegger and all the things, right? And so my exploration of masculinity is more about who are these children of this earth called men, and what are their stories? What are their actual stories? Not the ones that have been kind of like shoved in our faces.
And coming back to your question, as to what is the thing that really brought in my head was not only going backwards, but like what are we doing going forward? And like what are the catalysts and what are the changes that are going to affect the way we see and view masculinity in general? And I totally agree. I think that the societal shifts of what those things, what masculinity looks like, is going to affect the way that we view masculinity moving forward as well. So
the work is soul work, and I love that Michael Meade is on that, because I think it does us a disservice to stop at Iron John or even at King, Warrior, Magician, Lover. You asked a really interesting question. Where is here? Where is here? What time are we in? There are hunters and gatherers right now on this planet. There are men going to war right now on this planet. And if we just look at what is true in our souls, the truth is that men do gather. And when men gather, and when men gather with intention, and specific to our work, with love in their hearts, change is possible. And that change can look like, again, changes on the individual behavioral, actionable ways. And is it possible that when men connect to their hearts broadly and widely, that we can see cultural shift because of that? I believe we can. And so when I think about King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, what's missing? The father, the son. Why? Why are men so predisposed to become a king, to be this warrior? We are here to return the father archetype to this planet. Okay, so and what that means is, can we come into contact with the attributes of the father within ourselves, whether we have children or not? And some of those characteristics, some of those attributes that I like to highlight look like acknowledgement, look like encouragement. It looks like strength and structure in all of the typical ways. But when men lead from their hearts, and truly, when we get into connection and collaboration, and we come away from isolation and competition, which is what the dominant culture is constantly beating us over the head with, when we come into connection and collaboration, we find that we have more in common than we have different. We find that our stories can hit a resonant frequency that allows healing to permeate throughout these gatherings of men. And so why men? Why is it needed? Why are rites of passage needed? I think you said these are rituals or ceremonies. I want to be clear. Ritual is for transformation. Ceremony is for celebration. And so for men, when we're talking about ritual, rites of passage, we are marking the transformation from boyhood to manhood. As men, we don't have a physiological marker on that in the same way that the feminine does. And so throughout many cultures, throughout all of history, there are many types of initiation for young men. And so it's important that even we in the Western world, in America, start to ask the question, what does a ritual or what does a rite of passage look like for our young men? And the reason that that's important is because young men, and I'm just going to generalize here, have the capacity for destruction, have the capacity to do harm. And so without mentorship, that's what we see play out.
I am curious about where masculinity is going. And I think that like I agree with you, Adam, that masculinity, I think, is useful insofar as like how we identify with it. Um, and also I see that there are, like, looking forward like 20 years from now, like when people are describing themselves as gender non-conforming or are gender non-binary. We just we just had the Oscars, and I was having this discussion about with somebody else about having like these gendered categories. And I was gonna say, like, there's gonna be a performance that's gonna be gender non-binary, and we're gonna have to come face to face with this question. And I think in general, we're gonna have to come face to face with this question more earlier than not. And so like I identify with the term masculinity, and also I'm holding it lightly. I feel like I'm holding it to a term where it's going to come to a point where people might not identify with that term as much as they used to, or as much as it is now. um and I'm curious as to where men's work is going to go to that, because it does turn into a point where it becomes gender essentialist, or gender like a little bit of like gender biologism. And it's
Perhaps.
One thing I want to offer just as a frame also, that we are, we have a 6-week journey and there's lots to cover. And one thing I want to name, at least what I've tracked, and again, we can hear from you both too on this, is part of the thing that kind of stymies a sort of shared understanding on, particularly on gender, is that if we're talking, let's just say the West, there's this rightful critique of a universalist imposition, right? That's maybe what I would say, right? A universalist imposition. And again, rightfully critiqued, because there's a lot more diversity underneath this imposition. And at the same time, it seems the reaction to that is the opposite polarity, which is essentially that like gender is only a social construct, right? And so for me, it's like it's one universalism trying to supplant another, right? It's all a social construct, or it all isn't. And the challenge of that is for any group of folks to agree or to come to some sense of agreement, they tend to have to be a we, right? They tend to have to be a we, because when I talk to Indigenous guests, for example, and I say, well, what do you think about this? They tend to say, well, this is what we do, right? And they refer to their people. They're like, well, this is kind of what we do. But I don't think I've ever heard them say, everybody should be like this. And so they don't seem to have the same universalist challenge there. And so I see that that's often what is the undercurrent, right, of these kinds of conversations. It's like,
of course, these questions will come up because we talk about identity. When we talk about identity a lot, like masculinity is an identity. And I think that's something that is really important to really like dive through, because as soon as we kind of like understand that that is an identity that we possess, then we're going to have to come to the questions of nature versus nurture. Were we born this way, or this is something that we learned? Before the season that I did around the history of masculinity, I did one that was around how do boys become gendered? And I think it happens throughout their lifespan, throughout their lifespan, even before they're born. There's always these questions about who are the first people to touch a person, and it's usually the mother, and then it comes to the father, or even if they're two women, like what happens during the lifespan of a young boy for them to say I'm a boy, or maybe not to say I'm a boy, maybe to say that I'm a girl, maybe to say that I'm not any of these things. And so it is interesting to posit those questions, and I think we don't have answers to those questions yet. And I think it is interesting to hold those ideas lightly. And
what I'm tracking, and I'd love to just maybe reflect back, is there's I would say a deep longing for mythos that is at the heart, I think. And I mean, I hear Adam speaking very much in a mythos, I mean, in this moment, a sort of poetic mythos, right? And the deep value of that, right? Of course, that there's I would say that is a longing, right? No matter, for a human longing, certainly, to have some sense of meaning. And I think, Herman, you had said prior that in the absence of a defining mythos, or at least that I'm translating a bit, right? There, others will fill that gap. And I would say feminism, has filled that with a mythos as well. And that the Jordan Petersons have filled that, and the Andrew Tates have filled that, and that there's consequence, right, to what that mythos is, even if they don't say it like that. So that's part of the layer, I guess, that I'm sensing is also jostling, right, with sort of how do we translate that through lenses of systemic privilege and loss of cultural identity, all this stuff. So